So I'm from Austin, Texas. Was born and raised here. My parents raised me with a Catholic faith. I have a younger brother, and growing up here in Austin, I did the sort of things that most Austinites do. You hang around with your friends, you go out on the weekends, you do a lot of social things with your family, that sort of stuff. And that happened for a good part of my young adult life up until I hit my teens. And as I hit my teenage years, that's when I basically wanted to find out about all the other things that I didn't know yet. And I started testing the limits and trying to see what I could get away with. And I ended up sneaking into my first nightclub about the age 16. So as I encountered the downtown scene, I became exposed to the sort of things that go on downtown, drinking, drugs, girls, that sort of thing. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was about to start the dark part of my experiences. There's two sides to everything. And for all the times prior to that, I had thought that I was going on the right side. Well, it wasn't until I started to experiment with drugs and alcohol and partying and stuff that I found that there were some darker places out there.
Me and James used to hang out when we met each other when we were freshmen in high school, and we had a lot of good fun. We actually went downtown quite a bit, went to all the clubs, as many clubs as we can get accepted to. One club accepted us really easy, and that was Curfew. We got exposed to a lot of loud music, made you want to dance, learn how to dance, crazy dances. They all had a name. So yeah, and then we got exposed to other elements like drugs, different types of drugs. There was acid, X, alcohol, and due to the fact that our parents were kind of loose with their parenting with us, we were able to get away with a lot of stuff, and so it became a playground for James and I and a lot of other friends, and eventually I got a car and I was able to tote us all around, and it was a red rattler, I called it, because it rattled down the road. Yeah. Yeah, so it was a pretty fun-filled atmosphere on one hand, but too much of a good thing turned into not so good of a thing, and that's where I felt like we needed to start looking into certain responsibilities, and we were literally forced to look at that based on reactions from parents, reactions from life in general, and just looking at ourselves in the mirror.
So when I realized the position that I had found myself in, with the downtown scene, I realized I picked up some poor habits, some addictions, women, drugs, alcohol, and it started what would be a 15-year battle through that. I started with cocaine and ecstasy and acid and the different sorts of drugs that were present down there. And I wasn't afraid to try anything. I wanted to see what did what. And as I picked up these poor habits, they started opening doors where more trouble was right behind them, and more obstacles to overcome. And I found myself just barely getting by.
So there was a time when James and I, we were downtown every day, pretty much. Maybe we had a couple days that we missed just to sleep because we were just partying a whole lot. And it got to a point where we became regulars at these bars, mainly Curfew. And we started finding new friends. We started needing to support what we were doing, and so we had little drug deals going on where we made our nightly money, and then we got into it was actually getting a little bit more money than we were used to being teenagers. And with my friends, James had his friends. I was watching how our split was happening. And James was a little bit more daring. I'm not the kind of guy with roller coasters. He probably would ride roller coasters, you know, so he started into the, you know, he was doing more acid than I was. He was doing more, you know, coke, whatever it was. He was just doing more. And I was kind of watching from a side perspective of how his life was. And I was gaining a perspective of my own because I didn't want to be so hardcore like that, you know. And got to a point where I'd gotten into some trouble with some cops and, you know, drug busts and all that stuff. And I found myself living with some other people that were of the shady nature, and seeing how James had ran into them, and it became such an entangled mess that this was my friend and he was entangled with my roommates, and I was caught in this rock and a hard place, and I didn't know what to do about it. And so seeing how he just escalated into that deep abyss, if you will, and I was trying to get myself out of it, it really took me a hard look into the mirror and go, what are you doing? You're 6 foot, you weigh 130 pounds. What are you doing? And that's when I said, I need to start looking at different aspects. And I left Austin just to be able to find myself again. And that's where James was still involved with all these things. So big story about how he and I lived our lives, and I felt like something knocked me on the head sooner than it did him, to get me to understand where I should be in my life. And so that was it was pretty hard actually seeing your friends take a dive like that. And so from that perspective, I had to just let them go. I can't change people, you know, and that's where I knew it. And so it was pretty heartbreaking actually. And he wasn't the only one. It was a lot of my other friends that we actually went down. There was a whole group of guys that were just not wanting to progress and grow up, and I felt like I was having to do that for us all, you know, and I felt like I did it, you know. I felt like that was my escape. So I can actually say thanks to James for showing me what not to do. That was a big deal for me.
One of the things that came about from these poor experiences with drugs and alcohol and adversity was I found myself ruining relationships. I found myself burning bridges, taking advantage of people, you know, really upsetting family and friends and people that cared about me. And it ended up causing a lot of turmoil in my life, a lot of chaos. You know, people found it hard to be around me, you know, because I was always wanting to party, or I was always wanting to go out, or I was always, you know, trying to get by something, or, you know, get past something, or get over something. So people found it very difficult to even want to be around me. It was quite challenging, and I was so caught up and consumed with desire that I didn't even really bother to take a look at what was going on. It was me, and because of that, a lot of people suffered. It got so bad in my life that you know, I found myself in a very difficult position. You know, I was hanging around with the sort of people that wanted to get over on other people for money, you know, stealing from people, you know, trying to bust up drug deals, and I mean, doing the sort of things that, you know, people in their right nature don't do. I found myself a part of an experience where somebody had tried to rob another person that we knew, and it was a drug deal sort of thing go bad. And I found myself right in the middle of it and ended up getting hurt pretty bad by it, by about 4 or 5 different guys. One of them had a baseball bat, and I ended up in the hospital. And it was like a reality check for me. Unfortunately, it didn't stop me. It just kind of, you know, gave me that slap on the face, going, "Do you realize what you're doing?" And I didn't. I didn't realize what I was doing at the time. I wanted to go in this direction, and nothing was going to stop me, and that's where I was headed. I didn't realize that I was heading downward and that I was spiraling out. So many people were suffering because of that again. And so around this time of my life, it was my early 20s, I found out that my girlfriend and I were about to have a child. And it made me take a look at where I was in my life and realize that I needed to have more, that I needed to take responsibility for, what was going on, and at the same time I needed to better myself. I had the desire to do good, to do right, but I didn't really know how yet. And my first idea was to get my education, to get a degree and to find some sort of career. So I went back to school for a few years and stopped partying, every day, and took the commitment to try and do the right thing. I was still doing wrong on the weekends, though. Occasionally, I was trying to do both, and it wasn't working. It was like I was building it up with one side and knocking it down with the other, and it was kind of counterproductive. I look at it now, but I knew that I wanted better. I wanted more. I wanted to be able to provide for my son and for my girlfriend, and I just didn't know how to do it yet. My first ex, we stayed together for about 8 years, and after my son was born, we tried to have a really loving relationship. We had a few different places together, and it was a struggle. We were both working, we were both trying to have a family. We were still partying though together. We were doing the sort of things that we had done growing up through our teenage years, and we weren't being the best parents that we could have been. I think both of us, we had ideals of what we wanted in life, but I think after a couple of years we realized that it wasn't going to happen with one another. So after a few years of being single, I was heartbroken for a few years. It took me a few years to get over it. I jumped further into drugs, and the addictions that I'd picked up over the years, they were still there. So I found myself, using on a daily basis, whatever was there. I wasn't in particular at the time. In addition to that, I was going through girlfriend after girlfriend after girlfriend after girlfriend. Honestly, I don't even remember how many. But it was very chaotic. And after searching and really looking for a meaningful relationship, I was introduced to somebody who I thought was really amazing. So my second marriage lasted for about 3 years, and when we got together, I was really happy. I was introduced by a mutual friend, and we hit it off quite well. So well that I asked her to marry me 6 months after meeting her. And we were on the same wavelength. We partied a lot. I met someone who I thought could keep up with me, and there was a lot of happy moments. I was really content when I got married. I thought that this was going to be the one that I'd stay married to. After about 2.5 years, though, we spent so much time together, and we had different ideals for life. She wanted me to be something that I wasn't, and I wanted to continue to be the person that I was at the time. After I was married for about a year on my second marriage, my technical second marriage, I found myself having different sorts of experiences that I hadn't encountered before. I didn't really understand it at first, but they were precursors of things that were going to happen. I started slowly encountering otherworldly things during some of my drug usage, even after I was off drugs, because it wasn't an everyday sort of thing, but when we did get through it, I would see things that I couldn't explain, and my ex was suffering through this as well now. She was my wife at the time, but we ended up spending a lot of money on unnecessary things, shopping, drugs, vacations, just irresponsible sort of things that we were going through. But at the end of our relationship, it lasted for about 2.5 years, we got pregnant. She got pregnant, and we tried to work through our differences at the time, But after about 4 or 5 months into the pregnancy, we both thought that it wasn't best to stay with one another, and so we split. And at that point is where it really got bad for me. I've shared all these different stories of adversity with you, but it even took a darker turn at that point for me. I found myself partying on a whole nother level at that point. It was a very difficult time at the end of my divorce. I was self-destructing so bad that not only that I go through the loss of my wife and my child, but she actually took my son from me. And at the time, I couldn't battle it. I didn't have any means. I didn't want to fight. I was still caught up with me, my destruction and the things that were pushing me in the wrong way. It was quite challenging to encounter something like that. It was probably the hardest thing that I'd ever had to go through. The loss of my son and not being able to be there. It pushed me in a direction that I didn't want to hurt anymore. And for the next couple of years, I think I went after something, trying to numb the pain or to not deal with something. I was really hurt by it. So at this point in my life, going through all these chaotic experiences, after the divorce and the experiences with my ex-wife, and I found myself awakening spiritually, and going back to some of the things that I had seen beforehand. I was able to see things a little more clearly, spiritually speaking. I could see things that before were unrecognizable. Only now I could see that there was actually something really happening behind the scenes of life. I think a lot of people are challenged with the sort of things that I started to encounter. So I couldn't really share this stuff with anybody. I never had any background in anything like this before, but I thought myself to be very analytical. I like to understand the way things work, and so I took it upon myself to further investigate the things that were happening. I wanted to know what it was that I was seeing, and I wanted to know what it was that was happening to me. I know people have talked about spiritual awakenings, many times in a lot of different places, books, movies, things like that. But when something like that happens to a person, it really changes their perspective on life. After my spiritual awakening and after these otherworldly encounters that began to occur, I wanted to understand how to interact, how to discern the things that were happening. I found myself reaching spiritual enlightenment. It's an actual experience. It's not just something that you acquire through knowledge or reading a book, but it's an actual experience that occurred to me that once I reached an enlightenment, that it was like a door literally opened up inside of me with a blue-white light that began to shine. And inside of that experience, I learned to separate myself spiritually from my body. I found an out-of-body experience. So what led to my spiritual enlightenment was learning about how the body's energy works. I found there are chakra points on our body. There's 7 different chakra points on our body, from our base to our crown, and they all spin just like a wheel. And what I discovered, and this is through countless hours of research, meditation, fasting, praying, I was trying to discover the behind the scenes of every moment. And what I found were a balance of energy and consciousness. and it was like tuning each one of these energy points on my body. And when they became in tune, all in synchronization, is when the door opened to an actual spiritual enlightenment. Inside of that enlightened state of being is where I learned to separate myself from my body. And in an out-of-body state, I discovered that I could literally see the spiritual world at the same time as the material world. So during the experiences of learning the body's energy and understanding how the chakras work and finding a spiritual enlightenment, when I started to have visits by otherworldly persons, I started to meet with angels. Angels literally started coming over to my house. Sometimes there were 1 or 2 or 3 or 50. I met the cherubim, who are distinctly angel. One of them has the head of a lion, the other the head of a bird, the other the head of a cow, and then the other the head of a man. So they all have human bodies, but different types of creations, I think. I also met all the archangels, and they were the ones who really helped me to understand the body's energy. They were the ones to help me reach enlightenment. They also taught me a lot of lessons about the sort of person that I was at the time, and to help me examine my character so that I could become the person ultimately that they were asking or guiding me to become, myself. But one of the visits with the archangels, they basically, one of them walked over to me and noticed that my heart chakra was spinning out of alignment, spinning really fast. And they asked if they could give me a hand, and they reached over and put their hand on my heart chakra and slowed it down to the point where it lined up with all the other chakras. And at that point is when spiritual enlightenment happened, and I found serenity in, I think, what certain religions call as that perfect moment. That it's just a wonderful experience. So reaching this new place of enlightenment and having these visits from these otherworldly persons, one of the first things that I started to do was examine myself and my character, and sharing with you everything that I have been going through for the last 20 years. It was really difficult to have to look at what was going on in my life, that I was the problem, that I was wanting for the wrong sorts of things. So that was a very difficult challenge for me. I was told by them that I was the very worst one and the very best one at the same time. So that was really difficult to fathom. But it set me in motion on taking an inventory and making some decisions in my life to want to be a better person. I didn't really understand it at first. They were setting me up for what would be happening in the future. So after a few years of research with these otherworldly persons and the out-of-body experiences and the enlightenments and the discoveries that were coming to light and being presented, I found something rather extraordinary. I noticed light and energy, and there was something happening in every moment. There was something happening on my thoughts, on my emotions. I think it's something that we're all part of. And I noticed that I could make changes in thoughts and emotions. And when that happened, it caused something else in that moment to happen. So in an out-of-body state, what I found were we were visited in an instant by otherworldly persons, angels, extra-dimensional sorts of beings. And I found myself intrigued with their presence, that I wanted to know where they came from and what that was about. And literally I saw a spiritual matrix in every direction. It's what the white light is at the end of life. Literally, we connect to every one of these every night when we go to sleep. We're all going to see it one day at the end of our lives. But in an out-of-body state, I took the step to move over towards one, and I went into a different dimension, into a different realm. And the first time that I showed up there was frightening. I didn't know what to do. I came back right away. Eventually, over the next couple of years, I learned how to take walks into these different places. And it was like Alice in Wonderland. I was going down the rabbit hole. And the further I went, the more interaction that I had with otherworldly persons. I found several different otherworldly persons that are humanoid, different characteristics. There's extraordinary things that I pieced together later in life and later in the story, that these were the types of spiritual encounters that other religions have spoken about. Hinduism, for example. You know, I met an otherworldly type of person that had a very distinct characteristic. Their face changed all the time. Their eyes, their ears, their nose, their mouth, it continuously was in a state of flux. And it was like they just had a different face. Well, as I looked at Hinduism later in life, I realized that they had these statues with a face in the front and a face on the side and face in the back to signify the changing faces. So I realized that these are encounters that other persons had had also that helped move them along in their understanding of religion and spirituality. And I found myself just navigating this extraordinary place. And after meeting several other different types of persons like that, I landed in some place that I'd never seen before. It was amazing. It had 100-foot tall plus ceilings. There were 30,000, 40,000 people all moving about, you know, all having really great conversations. Just an amazing party. And after about half an hour of visiting with all these amazing people, a person walks over to me, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he introduces himself to me as God. So I realized that I was in heaven, in God's crystal palace, and I was meeting with the creator of everything. And he was just an amazing person. You know, I've been searching for so long for answers and understanding, and you know, for him. I didn't realize it, but I was searching for him. And you know, I offered him my hand, and he shook it. And he, at that point, showed me around his palace, and introduced me to everybody, and a very gracious host. And we sat and talked for a few hours about everything. I felt like I was catching up with my best friend that I hadn't seen in 20 years. And there he was, just you know, open and kind and curious, and wanted to know how my life was, and you know, just asking me the sort of questions that you would ask your long-lost best friend. It was really a great experience to have. So after befriending God, and him and I started to work on our relationship, he started to come over to the house. And every time that he came over to the house, it smelled like sweet roses. There was an amazing, sweet smelling fragrance that just lingered for days. He began teaching me the things that I was unaware of. For example, my behavior. Everything prior to our friendship, I didn't really understand that it was rooted in self-centeredness. You know, I thought life was about me at the time. I didn't really understand that it was really about him. So what he helped me to understand was the reason that Jesus had lived and died. I'm talking God our Father explained to me the reason for the atonement of Jesus Christ. And it was because of everything that I had ever done wrong before this that Jesus had actually lived and died. And it wasn't until he explained to me that he had actually gone through the things that he did to save my life so that I could have this friendship with him now, is when I really felt convicted for my sin. And, you know, it hurt because I realized that I'd killed him. And, you know, I think about it now. But you know, looking on, you know, the gratitude of what he really did is that he saved my life.
So as I went on my life. James was up on his, and So what I had to figure out was I needed to get out of the drug scene. I needed to move more into that place where, I tapped into my own consciousness. I tapped into my own spirituality, and I wanted to learn more about that. And I did come from a devout Christian background, but it was a little heavy and hard-handed, and I needed my own experience and understanding. So as I met my wife, we moved to Hawaii, started our own family, and during all that time I learned got more into my own spiritual life, having a lot of phenomenal experiences, spiritual experiences I still to this day cannot explain other than they were divine. And after, I guess it was 2009, we decided to move back to Texas for a number of reasons. I started poking around in social medias, Facebook and all that, and I'm more drawn to spiritual content and people talking about the good things in life and all that. And I come across James Martinez's excerpts and little clips and blurbs of great stuff saying, and I'm like, this couldn't be the James Martinez I know. The last time we talked, he was still on that road. And just so everybody understands, this is about a 14-year span from the time that I'd seen him last. And I'm sorry, it was 2009 when I talked to him. It was about 212, 211, 212. Yeah, that's what it was. And so there's been a long time in between, and I couldn't believe that what I'm reading, such good consciousness, some amazing literature is being published by this guy. Like, no way. So I had to find out what's going on, So I looked him up, and and I seen this guy. He was in front of the Austin Energy thing, holding his hands up like this, and he's bald, and I'm like, that don't look like James. Is that James? I looked on his front. I swear to you, I did not see him as being James Martinez, the guy I knew, because he had curly hair. He was skinnier, and it was a good memory of mine that I see a guy that's changed, and then so I looked on it, and I knew his brother, I knew his family. It was Hank on there. There it is, and I was like, that is him, and it took me nothing to call him, and I'm sitting in my office, and I was just blown away. I was so amazed. It really helped me, it helped me understand, wow, man, he came through, It was one of my questions in life, was he going to ever pull through to this thing? Because it never really made sense, because a lot of people and what we all went through, half of us pulled through and half of us didn't. And it was a delight to me, and it was really nice to call him up and say, hey, James, and then it was just back right where we started, left where we left off. So from that perspective, I was sharing with him in my spiritual journey and what it all entailed, and he connected with me on his, and we started comparing notes. His notes were on another level. I can just only say that, wow, but interesting enough, he was able to connect with me on that day and really helped me understand that he is connected in that way. And he gave me confirmation in our conversation. That conversation over the phone was pretty amazing. I got to see a friend come around, it was big. So, James said he was writing this book, and we kept in touch, and he wanted me to look at it. I was really amazed by it. We met a couple times, and finally he gave me the manuscript, just leafed out manuscript, nothing bound, nothing published, nothing like that. But I was able to read it front to back really quick. It was not like quick, but I couldn't put it down. It was that amazing and unbelievable and believable all at the same time, because I'd shared in some of those experiences that I had and he confirmed a lot of them that I still had the question mark on. And I was able to edit the editor. It was nice. It was pretty neat, and I grew from it. I grew from the understanding that what he went through, and it's just another part of my own journey that I was really blessed to see my friend get to a point in his life, you know. And my family got to share in it too. I have a pretty large family, and I got to talk to them about it, and they got to understand it. And my wife, knowing James from the other side versus this side, she was in total disbelief too. And I go, "This is James's book," and she was like, "No way." I was like, "You know the guy? Remember that guy? This is his book." And she's like, "Really?" So, pretty amazing. That's all I can say at this point.
After really understanding what was being presented to me, God our Father, He gave me a great opportunity. He said, "There's the door, but you're the one that has to walk through it." And it wasn't just a metaphor. I mean, there literally was a door there, but He said that if I chose to walk through it, that on the other side of that I'd get to go up to heaven, and that we would do all these extraordinary things, and that people would talk about these things for generations and generations and generations. And it was quite challenging at first to acknowledge what was being presented to me, but after a few hours of going through this conversation with him, I accepted the position. And at that point, God our Father and Jesus Christ, both there, Jesus stood up and He says, "I want you to follow me." And he was being literal. He said, "Literally, I want you to stand up and follow me right now." And at that point, a portal opened up. It was about 6 foot in diameter with a walkway that just led on into forever. And He turned around and He says, "I want you to follow me." And I started to walk behind Him, and I followed after Him. And I did a picture of what that experience was like for me. But every 10, 20 feet were people, dancing and laughing and playing and working and living their lives. And He was showing me that these were going to be all the people that we were going to be affecting in the future. And He shared that with me before we even started. So that was part of, the blessing that was being presented to me as well. At that time, when I started to take walks with God our Father and with Jesus Christ, they were giving me the confidence to do the things that they were asking of me. They were giving me the encouragement. They were giving me the thing that no one else could give me. They gave me friendship. They offered me family. They basically believed in me when no one else would. And it was really rewarding. It was gratifying, and it gave me a sense of hope. So at that point, God our Father asked if I could write, and I said, "I can." And He says, "Are you sure?" And I says, "Yes, I can." He says, "Okay, well, we'd like to offer you a position. Can you write for us?" And I said, "Yes." And He says, "Okay, well, what are you going to write about?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." He says, "Well, what's it going to be called?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." He says, "Well, where are you going to start?" I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Are you sure you can do this?" And I said, I'm sure. And I said, "If you'll let me do this, if you'll allow for me to do it, I can do it." And so God our Father leaned over to Jesus, and He says, and they kind of talked for a moment, and He says, "Okay, I tell you what, we're going to let you do it, and here's how you do it. You start at the beginning, and you keep it simple and direct." He said, "I don't want you to worry about anything, I just want you to start, because when you do, we're going to be there with you, and it's going to get finished." I said, "Okay." So we started, and within a year and a half, we wrote our first book, and that's since been published. It's called Once Upon a Transcendent Realm. I've written a second book that's just about to be released now. It's called Eternus Spurere, and that's a whole other conversation in itself. But I've even written the third book already, and it's being typed up right now. It's to a manuscript form, but I feel I can write more books about all these experiences. There's really so much to say about all these things that I've become a part of. I'm not the only person who's ever had these experiences either. There have been literally thousands of people throughout history, all the way back to biblical times. The book of Genesis, it starts with Enoch having a walk, very similar to the way I've walked. Noah having the same sorts of experiences. Abraham, Jacob, Ezekiel, seeing God in the same way that I've seen Him as well. Writing about all these things, there are proof of the things that I've become part of. So I invite people to connect with this journey, to hopefully it resonates someplace within their lives, to reach out for whatever it is that might be missing, to start working on their relationships and their walks, and really you know, getting something that I didn't have for so long, and that's hope, and love, and faith.